It seemed nothing could ever erase them. Yet, hidden in the shadows of history, there was a people who built massive cities, pyramids rising high above the dense jungle canopy, and a system of astronomical knowledge far ahead of their time. These were the Maya, masters of the sky, architects of stone and spirit, and keepers of a cultural legacy the modern world is still trying to decode. But then, sometime around the 9th century, something extraordinary happened. The bustling cities suddenly went silent, populations vanished, grand plazas grew empty, and the stone walls were swallowed by the forest. A civilization that once seemed eternal appeared to disappear in nothing more than a single long breath of history. That question has haunted generations. What really happened to the Maya? Was it nature itself, turning against them with devastating droughts? Was it war and civil strife tearing their society apart? Or was it the very weight of their own prosperity, crushing the system until it collapsed under its own greatness? So many theories have been offered, yet every time we think we've grasped the answer, the Maya slip through our fingers, leaving behind even more unanswered mysteries. In tonight's episode of Bedtime History, we'll journey back into the jungles of Central America, to the land where the Maya once raised towering pyramids, lively plazas, and observatories tied to the heavens. We'll explore where they came from, how they rose to greatness, and why, in the end, they quietly faded away, leaving behind silent cities hidden in the dark. This is not just a story of the past, but a reminder of how fragile every civilization truly is. When we think of the Maya, we often picture the towering pyramids rising out of the jungle, but before they could build such monuments, the Maya had to master something far more fundamental: agriculture. Farming was the backbone that sustained their society, the thread that tied people to the earth and to the universe itself. The Maya lived on a land that was vast but harsh. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, they had no mighty rivers to flood the soil with fertile silt. Instead, they faced dry limestone plateaus, humid rainforests, and long dry seasons that cracked the ground open. And yet, in the midst of these challenges, they managed to turn nature into an ally with remarkable creativity. Water, the lifeblood of any agricultural system, did not come easily. The Maya relied on natural sinkholes called cenotes, deep limestone wells that held precious rainwater. But that wasn't enough. They dug reservoirs, built canals, and even designed underground stone-lined cisterns to capture and preserve every drop. During times of drought, these works of engineering kept their seeds alive and allowed entire communities to endure in places that seemed impossible to farm. At the very center of it all stood maize. To the Maya, corn was not just food, it was creation itself. They believed humankind was formed from maize dough, the sacred seed they called ixim. Corn was their staple crop, but it was also the axis of their worldview, woven into both daily meals and holy offerings. Alongside maize, they planted beans, squash, chili peppers, and cacao. The three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, worked in harmony. Beans climbed the cornstalks, squash spread across the ground to retain moisture, and maize provided the main source of food. Cacao, meanwhile, became the drink of the gods, reserved for rituals and the elite. Maya farming was not about destroying the land, but about living in symbiosis with it. In many regions they practiced milpa, clearing a patch of forest, burning the trees for ash fertilizer, planting maize, beans, and squash for a few years, and then allowing the forest to regenerate. In swampy areas, they invented chinampas, raised fields built from mud, branches, and plants, turning wetlands into fertile gardens. Thanks to these methods, the Maya could make use of nearly every kind of terrain: highlands, rainforests, dry plains, even marshes. But agriculture for the Maya was never just about survival. It was about ritual and belief. When they sowed their seeds, they prayed to Chak, the rain god. At harvest, they offered maize at their altars. Earth, water, seeds, gods, and humans all flowed together in a single cycle of life. That cycle nourished millions for centuries and created the abundance that allowed the Maya elite to build temples, perform ceremonies, and establish powerful city-states. From the endless maize fields and the hidden reservoirs deep in the forest, every grain of food flowed into the cities. And it was this sustainable agricultural foundation that allowed great centers like Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Chichen Itza to rise, shining stone beacons in the heart of the jungle. Every temple, every plaza, every carved monument was not just a symbol of power or faith, but also a quiet tribute to the humble maize seed, the tiny grain that built an entire world. When European explorers first stumbled into the jungles of Central America in the 19th century, they could hardly believe their eyes. Towering stone walls draped in moss, massive stairways leading up to pyramids hidden beneath the canopy, and vast plazas where birds now replaced the footsteps of people. They called them the lost cities. But to the Maya, these were once the beating hearts of life, places where politics, religion, trade and culture converged, where the sound of drums, trumpets, and ritual chants once drowned out even the whispers of the forest. Tikal, set in the lowlands of Guatemala, was one of the greatest of them all. Its towering temple pyramids rose high above the sea of jungle, like stone lighthouses in a vast green ocean. Each pyramid was not only a sacred space of worship, but also a symbol of royal power. Carved hieroglyphs on the walls told stories of battles, political marriages, and sacrificial rites that bound people to the gods. Standing in Tikal today, you don't just see stone, you almost hear the footsteps of thousands of worshippers filling the plaza, torches flickering against the cold stone at night. Palenque, in Chiapas, Mexico, carried a different beauty. Unlike the sky-reaching pyramids of Tikal, Palenque was celebrated for its elegance and refinement. Its palace, complete with an observatory tower, corridors, meeting halls, and courtyards, was carefully designed, as if it were meant not only for ruling, but also for contemplating the beauty of nature and the heavens. The tomb of King Pakal the Great, discovered here, became one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. The carved lid of his stone sarcophagus, mysterious and intricate, sparked endless debates among scholars for generations. Farther east in Honduras, Copan emerged as a grand museum of Maya sculpture. Here, carved stelae and altars were so detailed that you can still see the expressions on faces, the folds of garments, and the ornaments of jewelry. Copan was not only a political hub, but also a cultural cradle where art and religion merged in every stone. Each monument read like an open book, recording dynasties, alliances, wars, and the belief that human authority was always intertwined with divine destiny. And then there is Chichen Itza on the Yucatan Peninsula, perhaps the most famous Maya city remembered today. Its pyramid, El Castillo, also known as the Temple of Kukulkan, was more than an architectural marvel. It was an astronomical instrument of striking precision. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, shadows falling across the steps form the image of a great serpent descending from the top, as if the god himself were manifesting before the people. This wasn't just engineering, it was faith-made stone, built on the belief that the cosmos and humanity must move as one, that nature and religion could never be separated. These cities did not exist in isolation. They were connected through a vast network of trade, diplomacy, intermarriage, and even war. Stone-paved roads and river routes linked Tikal with Copan, Palenque with Calakmul, and Chichen Itza with coastal villages. Goods flowed across this web: cacao, salt, turquoise, seashells, carrying not just commodities, but also ideas, customs, and sacred traditions. Each city stood as its own power, but together they formed the great chain of Maya civilization. And yet, for all their grandeur, Maya cities were never home to everyone. Most Maya people lived in small villages farming the fields, while the cities served as centers of ceremony, politics, and commerce, stages where power was displayed and the gods were honored. In other words, the cities were the stage, while the villages were the everyday life. And it was this delicate balance between the two worlds that allowed the Maya to endure for centuries. Beyond the grand cities, perhaps the greatest achievement the Maya left behind was their writing. Their hieroglyphic system, made up of hundreds of signs that were both images and sounds, could depict concrete objects while also expressing abstract ideas. On carved stelae, temple walls, and in the few surviving bark paper books, the Maya recorded dynastic history, astronomical events, rituals of sacrifice, and even poetry. To them, writing was not just a way to preserve memory, it was a pathway to immortality. Whenever a new king took the throne, a stone monument was raised not only to proclaim his power, but to inscribe his presence into eternity. In the Maya worldview, an event only truly existed once it was written down. To carve it into stone was to send a message across generations, even to the gods themselves, that humanity had fulfilled its duty. A stela, then, was more than a chronicle. It was a bridge between past, present, and forever. Yet Maya writing was nearly buried by time and history. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they destroyed most Maya books in brutal campaigns of cultural purification. To them, these works were heresy, marks of the devil. Thousands of volumes went up in flames, leaving behind only a handful of fragile manuscripts we now call the codices, the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier codices. Written on paper made from tree bark, these rare books became the final fragments through which we can glimpse this intricate language. Miraculously, even with so much lost, modern archaeologists and linguists have managed to piece together the code. Beginning in the 1950s, scholars like Yuri Norosov and many others discovered that Maya writing was not just symbolic, it was phonetic. Each glyph carried syllables that could be strung together into words. Thanks to this breakthrough, a history that had been silent for centuries began to speak again. As the inscriptions on the walls of Palenque or Copan were deciphered, stories emerged of kings and dynasties, of war and peace, of rituals and astronomy. We learned that Pakal the Great of Palenque ruled for decades, that bloody battles raged between Tikal and Calakmul, that the Maya observed Venus as a war god and timed their campaigns to its movements. Suddenly their world was no longer vague and mysterious. It became vivid and detailed. But Maya writing was more than record-keeping. It reflected their entire vision of the cosmos. They believed time itself was circular, repeating endlessly, and that humans lived within this eternal cycle. Their calendars, most famously the long count, were not simply tools to track days, they were instruments to connect humanity with the gods and the rhythm of the universe. Every ritual, coronation, or war had to be aligned with the calendar, ensuring each act was in harmony with the heavens. Writing, then, was not just storytelling, it was power, it was prayer, it was the heartbeat of time itself. Imagine a temple wall covered in glyphs, not there merely to display knowledge, but to turn the entire building into a text where every stone was a letter and the whole temple a living manuscript. To stand before those ruins today is not only to see architecture, but to read a book written in stone beneath the sky. And yet here lies the painful paradox. The Maya carved their words into stone to resist forgetting, but for centuries those words lay in silence. The Spanish destruction severed their history. Only in recent decades have we begun to hear that voice again, to trace meaning in those forgotten lines. To study Maya writing is not just archaeology, it is an act of calling back the stolen soul of a civilization. If writing was the Maya's way of leaving a voice for future generations, then religion was the very soul that shaped every part of their lives. Nothing happened outside the presence of the gods. Not farming, not building, not war, not even marriage. The Maya saw their world as a layered universe, heaven above, the earth in between, and the underworld below, all connected by a central axis. Its most powerful symbol was the great saber tree, with roots sinking deep into the earth and branches stretching high into the sky. In the Maya imagination, the saber was the world tree, the cosmic pillar uniting the three realms, the gods above, humanity in the middle, and the spirits of ancestors in the world below. The Maya believed the universe had been created and destroyed many times, each age a cycle. The gods experimented, failed, and tried again. In their sacred text, the Popol Vuh, the first humans were shaped from mud, but crumbled away, too fragile to last. The second were carved from wood, but they lacked soul and emotion. Only when people were formed from maize, the sacred seed of life, did humanity truly come into being. For this reason, maize was not just food, but flesh and blood itself, proof that humans carried within them the essence of earth and sky. In the Maya pantheon, there was no single all-powerful god. Instead, there were hundreds of deities, each tied to a force of life, the sun, the rain, maize, death, the night sky. These gods were not fixed. They could shift in form, both generous and merciless. The rain god Chak, for example, brought fertile harvests, but could also unleash storms that devastated crops. To worship the gods was to accept this dual nature, to learn how to live in balance between blessing and punishment. Rituals, therefore, stood at the very center of Maya society. They were not limited to prayers. They often demanded blood. Blood was the most sacred substance, nourishment for the gods. Kings and nobles performed painful acts of self-sacrifice, piercing their tongues or even their genitals with sharp thorns, letting drops of blood fall onto bark paper before burning it so the smoke could rise to the heavens. In moments of great importance, war captives were sacrificed, their still-beating hearts offered to the sun god. To modern eyes, these acts may seem horrific, but to the Maya, they were sacred duties that kept the universe in motion. The temples of the Maya were the stages for these cosmic dramas. Their step pyramids were not only symbols of power, but recreations of the holy mountains where gods dwelled. When rituals took place at the top, the entire community gathered below, witnessing what they believed was a meeting between humans and the divine. The pounding of drums, the call of trumpets echoing through the jungle, the flicker of fire in the night, and solemn dances weaving through the crowd. Together they created a scene both overwhelming and mysterious. It was a moment when the community felt united, not only with each other, but with the cosmos itself. Religion was also inseparable from astronomy. The Maya did not just observe the skies for farming. They used the heavens to decide the timing of rituals and events. Venus, for example, was seen as a symbol of war. When it appeared in certain positions, a Maya king might declare a campaign. The sun and moon, too, were tied to human cycles. Women's fertility, life and death, planting and harvest. Priests, therefore, were not only spiritual leaders but also astronomers, ensuring that every action aligned with the rhythm of the universe. This absolute devotion to cosmic cycles made the Maya value calendars more than almost any other civilization. They used several: the 365-day Harb for daily life, the 260-day Zolkin for sacred rituals, and the long count to measure spans of thousands of years. To the Maya, each day carried its own soul, a force for good or ill that determined the destiny of whatever took place upon it. Weddings, wars, even trading journeys were all planned with meticulous attention to the calendar. What's remarkable is that despite all its complexity, Maya religion was not seen as a burden, but as natural as breathing. Faith flowed into every moment. Children were named after the day they were born, their lives tied to the spiritual meaning of that date. The elderly passed away believing they would continue into another cycle. And through every ritual, the community was reminded that they were never separate from the universe. They were part of its eternal rhythm. In the rhythm of Maya religion, science was never separate. It was woven into the very fabric of belief. The Maya watched the skies not merely out of curiosity, but because they believed that every movement above directly shaped human destiny. Yet from this faith, they built an astronomy and mathematics so advanced that even the modern world cannot help but marvel. If you were to stand in a Maya plaza on the summer or winter solstice, you would see sunlight pierce through the openings of temples and pyramids, landing exactly on pre-calculated points. Many of their monuments were aligned with extraordinary precision, so that the sun or moon would rise or set at precise spots on the horizon on sacred days. This was no accident. It was the result of generations of careful observation, measurement, and calculation, a patient quest to uncover the laws of the cosmos. At the heart of this system was mathematics. The Maya used a vigesimal system based on the number 20 and represented numbers with just 3 elegant symbols: a dot for 1, a bar for 5, and a shell for 0. That shell, the symbol for 0, was one of their greatest achievements, something few civilizations of their time had discovered. With it, they could calculate time and astronomy with striking accuracy, making their mathematical system far more powerful and flexible. The Dresden Codex preserves their astonishing precision. It shows that the Maya calculated the cycle of Venus at almost exactly 584 days. They knew Venus would disappear from the sky for a time before returning, and they recorded each stage of its journey. To them, Venus was the god of war, and its cycle often determined when a king would launch a campaign. This merging of astronomy and politics reveals how knowledge, for the Maya, was never abstract. It directly shaped the course of society. They also left eclipse tables, predictions of solar and lunar eclipses that remain impressively accurate even by modern standards. The Maya knew when the sun would darken, and these events were bound to rituals of immense importance. A priest, standing with his eyes lifted to the heavens and calculations in hand, was not only a sage, but the very figure who reassured the community that the universe was still in balance. And yet, for all their brilliance, the Maya never developed some of the basic tools we might expect. They had no wheel for transport, no beasts of burden to carry heavy loads, no metal tools for construction. Their temples, pyramids, and stelae were all built with stone tools and sheer human effort. This paradox only deepens the wonder: how could a civilization lacking such technologies achieve such breathtaking scientific mastery? The answer may lie in how they understood knowledge itself. For the Maya, knowledge was not meant to serve material convenience. It was meant to serve the order of the cosmos and the demands of ritual. Building a pyramid in perfect alignment with the solstice sunrise mattered more than inventing a wheel to drag stones. Harmony with the heavens was more important than efficiency on earth. And that is what set their civilization apart. They did not chase convenience, they pursued cosmic balance. When you place your hand on a stone carved with Maya glyphs, you see numbers, dates, celestial markers. The record of a mind patient enough to observe the sky across dozens of generations to capture even the smallest movements of stars. Out of that came the Maya calendar, so sophisticated that it gave rise to countless myths in later centuries. Seen this way, Maya knowledge was deeply philosophical. Time was not a straight line moving forward, but a spiral that returned upon itself. Within that spiral, no one was ever truly gone. They were reborn into the next cycle. It was the same with their own history, prosperity and collapse, loss and renewal. And perhaps when we search for the mystery of their disappearance, this is the lesson they leave us. That their vanishing was not an ending at all, but a turning point in the great cycle of time. It wasn't only mathematics and astronomy that reached remarkable heights. Maya society itself was built on a complex political system. There was never a single empire uniting the entire region. Instead, dozens of independent city-states thrived, each ruled by a king who was seen as the bridge between the gods and humankind. These city-states cooperated at times, clashed at others, forming alliances and breaking them like stars in the night sky, shining brightly, then fading into darkness. Every dynasty revolved around its ruler, the Kuhulajau, the Holy Lord. His power did not come solely from armies or wealth, but from sacred legitimacy. He was believed to be a descendant of the gods, the one who maintained cosmic balance through ritual and sacrifice. Every battlefield victory, every public blood offering reinforced the belief that this king had been chosen by the heavens. Beneath him stood the noble class, who acted as administrators, generals, and advisors. The priests held enormous influence, for they controlled astronomical knowledge and the calendar, deciding when rituals or wars could be waged. The Maya army was not only a force of defense, but also a machine to capture prisoners for sacrifice. At the foundation of it all were the farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, those whose labor sustained the economy of the civilization. War was constant. Unlike Rome or China, where emperors sought to unify vast territories, the Maya seemed to accept a fragmented order in which each dynasty had to continually prove its glory through war. Tikal and Calakmul, the two superpowers of the 6th and 7th centuries, fought each other for decades in what scholars now call the superpower wars. When one city-state gained the upper hand, its influence spread. But the balance was always fragile, and a single defeat could topple an entire dynasty. Carvings on stelae record these conflicts in detail, not just battles, but the capture of enemy rulers. For the Maya, war was not primarily about land or wealth. It was about taking captives. To seize a king and sacrifice him publicly was more than humiliation for the defeated city. It was a cosmic triumph. This is why wars were waged again and again, not to annihilate rivals, but to feed the cycle of ritual and power. At first, this system fueled extraordinary growth. Each city strove to build higher temples, host grander festivals, and advance knowledge to prove superiority. Rivalry pushed Maya civilization to dazzling heights, but within it lay the seeds of collapse. As resources dwindled, as wars dragged on, the brilliance of the city-states began to dim. The rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul illustrates this perfectly. For centuries, they traded victories and defeats, pulling smaller city-states into their orbit. Sometimes, even a minor ally could tip the balance. Yet no power lasted forever. Both giants eventually fell, leaving behind ruined cities, swallowed by the jungle. War also left its mark on Maya art and architecture. Stone carvings often show kings standing triumphantly over bound captives, swords in hand, the defeated kneeling at their feet. These images were propaganda, yes, but also declarations that royal power was sanctioned by the gods. Look closer, though, and you see a vicious cycle. The more victories, the more sacrifices. The more sacrifices, the more demand for war. And the more war, the weaker society became. In this fractured world, no single force could protect the civilization as a whole. When droughts came, when crops failed, each city-state had to fend for itself. Locked in rivalry, they could not unite against disaster. The very decentralization that once fueled creativity became a fatal weakness when true crisis struck. And so, when we read the inscriptions celebrating their victories, we cannot ignore the paradox. What the Maya considered their greatest glory may also have sown the seeds of their downfall. Behind every triumph lay abandoned fields, captured rulers, and divided communities. Those cracks, accumulated over centuries, would eventually open the path to inevitable collapse. When we look at the decline of the Maya, many scholars today agree that the causes were not just war or religion, but deeper internal crises created within their own society. For centuries, the Maya population grew steadily, fueled by smart farming techniques and periods of political stability. Cities like Tikal, Copan, and Palenque may have reached tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people. But this population boom, instead of becoming the foundation for lasting strength, made the system increasingly fragile. To feed so many mouths, the Maya had to push their land to the limit. Their milpa system, clearing and burning forest to farm, only worked when populations were smaller, giving the soil time to recover. But as numbers surged, farmers had no time to let fields rest. They were forced into constant cultivation. The soil grew tired, lost its nutrients, and yields dropped. In the highlands, terraced fields eroded under heavy rains. In the lowlands, canals could no longer keep floods under control. Forests, once the lungs of the land, a source of timber and fuel, were cut down at alarming speed, leaving bare ground vulnerable to collapse. Nature, once bent to human will, began to strike back. Climate studies show that by the 9th century, Central America endured a series of prolonged droughts, some lasting decades. When the seasonal rains failed, when reservoirs ran dry, the entire agricultural system collapsed. Corn, the sacred lifeblood of the Maya, could no longer sustain the people. A society utterly dependent on the rhythm of rain found itself staring into tragedy. When the rains vanished, faith began to crack, and with it, the very civilization itself. Hunger set in. Farmers, once the backbone of Maya society, could no longer feed their families, let alone supply the temples and the nobility. Many abandoned their fields in search of survival elsewhere. Others rose up against their rulers. Meanwhile, nobles and priests still demanded offerings, still called for blood rituals to win back the gods' favor. The gap between common people and the ruling elite widened into a chasm. The last inscriptions from this era often describe blood sacrifices, as if the harder times became, the more desperately the Maya clung to their gods. But no matter how elaborate the rituals, the rains did not return, and when faith itself failed to deliver, the spiritual foundation of society began to crumble. Copan tells this story in the starkest way. At its peak, it boasted a sophisticated agricultural system along its riverbanks. But rapid population growth stripped the soil bare. Archaeologists found only a thin layer of earth, a few centimeters deep, lying above raw bedrock. With the land exhausted, people abandoned Copan, leaving behind its towering stele, monuments no one remained to read. Drought and famine also made wars more vicious. Instead of uniting in crisis, city-states raided each other for food. Scarcity hardened hearts. Prisoners taken in war were sacrificed not just as symbols of triumph, but as desperate pleas for rain. Yet when blood stained the stones and the skies remained empty, despair spread even further. Imagine a Maya plaza in the late 9th century. People gathered, starving, watching a sacrifice unfold. The king and priests perform their rituals on the temple steps. Blood flows onto the stone, yet above them the sky is a cloudless, merciless blue. In that silence, you can almost feel the emptiness. A society that once believed it moved in harmony with the cosmos now felt abandoned by it. Many researchers argue that it was the combination of overpopulation, exhausted land, deforested hillsides, and relentless droughts that created a perfect storm that pushed the Maya to the edge. Their fall was not sudden, not the work of a single war or catastrophe, but a slow unraveling. Cracks widened over centuries until the whole system collapsed like a great temple rotting away from the inside. The clearest traces of decline appear at Tikal, once the radiant heart of Maya civilization. Studies show that around the year 869, the last great monuments were raised. After that came only silence. No new stelae, no towering temples, just the slow advance of the jungle swallowing the ancient stone steps. Copan, famous for its hieroglyphic stairway, met the same fate. After its final dynasty, its people left, abandoning a city to the forest. Palenque, once proud with its exquisite carvings, slipped quietly into obscurity, its temples and tombs hidden beneath a blanket of green. This collapse did not happen all at once, but unfolded unevenly across the region. Some cities fell earlier, others clung on for another century. Yet the overall direction could not be reversed. One by one, the centers of power were abandoned, and the drumbeats of ritual fell silent. The people did not vanish overnight. They drifted away, leaving behind the grand urban stage for simpler village life, farming small plots, removed from the elaborate political and religious systems of the past. One of the starkest signs of collapse is the silence of the stele. For centuries, every king carved his victories and rituals into stone as if to etch his power into eternity. But by the end of the 9th century, the inscriptions stopped. Not because kings no longer existed, but because the system was too exhausted, too depleted to raise such monuments. History, once carved into stone, now slipped quietly into silence. Archaeologists have uncovered the homes of commoners from this period. What they found tells its own story: poorer belongings, scarcer food, makeshift living spaces. Life for ordinary people had grown harder, with soil depleted, harvests failing, and endless wars draining their strength. City life no longer held its promise. The burden of tribute and ritual became too heavy. So families left, carrying what little they could in search of a better chance to survive. And yet, this collapse was not extinction. The Maya did not disappear. They simply stepped away from the grandeur of their cities and returned to a more scattered, modest way of life. Their descendants still lived on, still planted maize, still honored their gods, still spoke Maya languages. What ended was not their existence, but their monumental age. The pyramids stopped rising, the stelae ceased to speak, the cosmic scale rituals faded away. By the 10th century, many southern cities lay fully surrendered to the jungle. Stone roads grew moss, temple walls crumbled into heaps of rubble. Birds and wild animals roamed freely where once great processions had marched. To nature, humanity was but a fleeting moment. The forest came back as if the palaces and temples had never been there at all. As the cities of the southern lowlands fell into silence, many might have thought that Maya civilization had come to its end. But, in truth, the story did not end there. In the northern Yucatan Peninsula, a new chapter began. one of revival but also of new upheavals. And at the heart of this resurgence stood Chichen Itza, a striking testament to the Mayas' enduring vitality after the crisis. Built near a great natural well, the deep limestone sinkholes known as cenotes, Chichen Itza possessed a unique advantage over the southern centers. In a land where rain was uncertain and droughts were frequent, these natural reservoirs offered a constant supply of water, sustaining both daily life and religious devotion. For the Maya, the cenote was more than water. It was a gateway to the underworld, the dwelling place of the gods. Ritual offerings and even human sacrifices were cast into its depths, in the belief that such gifts would win the gods' favor and bring rain. The treasures and remains recovered from beneath those dark waters still bear witness to the fervor of those ancient rites. From the 10th to the 12th century, Chichen Itza flourished, becoming the most powerful city in the Maya world. Its greatness lay not only in scale, but also in the unique blending of styles it embodied. The Temple of the Warriors, with its endless rows of carved stone columns, stood as a monument to martial might. The Pyramid of El Castillo, the Temple of Kukulkan, was both a feat of architecture and an astronomical calendar aligned so precisely that on the equinoxes, sunlight cast the illusion of a giant serpent descending the steps. This was not simply construction, Widavki, it was the fusion of science and faith, of mathematics and myth. Unlike many southern cities, often fractured by competing rulers, Chichen Itza appears to have embraced a more stable political structure. Some scholars suggest it was not governed by a single king, but by a council of lords. Such a system reduced dependence on any one figure and allowed the city to endure longer in an era of instability. Trade, too, propelled Chichen Itza's rise. Situated near the coast, it became a vibrant hub of exchange, linking the Maya to distant peoples. Salt, honey, brilliant feathers, jade, cacao, and especially obsidian. The volcanic glass, sharper than steel, all passed through its markets. Its reach spread across the Yucatan, turning Chichen Itza into a regional superpower. But what makes Chichen Itza most remarkable is its cultural fusion. Its temples and carvings reveal striking Toltec influences from central Mexico. The Temple of the Warriors, the Chacmul statues reclining with offering bowls upon their chests, and the feathered serpent god Kukulkan all echo the imagery of Quetzalcoatl. These parallels suggest that rather than closing in on themselves after the southern collapse, the Maya opened outward, absorbing and blending foreign traditions. This adaptability allowed Chichen Itza to thrive as a cosmopolitan, multicultural center where ideas and beliefs converged. And yet beneath the brilliance lay familiar tensions. Like all great Maya cities, Chichen Itza could not escape the pull of power struggles. By the 12th century, its strength began to wane. Internal disputes and the rise of rival city-states chipped away at its dominance. Eventually, Mayapan emerged to take its place as the new capital of the northern Maya world. Still, the ruins of Chichen Itza today speak of a golden era unmatched. Standing before El Castillo, one can almost see the crowds gathered for the great festivals, hear the drums echoing, feel the energy of dancers in motion, and watch as the serpent of light slithered down the pyramid steps. It was a moment when cosmos and community became one, when time itself seemed to fold upon itself. And so the disappearance of the Maya becomes more complex than legend suggests. They did not vanish in the 9th century, they shifted, transformed, and re-emerged elsewhere. But each rebirth was shorter-lived than the last, each decline more profound. Until, at last, the civilization that once lit the jungles with stone and fire faded into the long shadows of memory. All that Chichen Itza had proved, that the Maya could rise again, also foreshadowed another cycle. When power stays concentrated too long, it eventually fractures from within. Behind the brilliance of Chichen Itza, the curtain of history rose on a new stage, Mayapan. Deep in the Yucatan Peninsula, Mayapan drew people inward. Its great stone walls encircled plazas, temples, and the homes of the ruling elite, embracing tens of thousands of residents within its compact core. Unlike the sprawling cities of the Classic Age, Mayapan represented a different choice. After crisis, the Maya tightened their circle, pulled the reins of security, and placed authority in a single, walled center where it could be controlled. Mayapan did not stand alone. For centuries, Yucatan was shaped by a loose alliance of three cities, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Mayapan, remembered as the League of Mayapan. It was at once a political pact, a commercial arrangement, and a promise of stability after generations of upheaval. But every alliance rests on fragile balance. And as Mayapan's ruling lineages grew more powerful, they slowly tugged the cord toward themselves, leaving the others suffocated. Walking among Mayapan's ruins today, you can still see the echo of that late Maya aesthetic. Small pyramids imitating El Castillo at Chichen Itza, temples of sacrifice, reclining chacmul statues, cradling offering bowls, rows of columns like a petrified army. The Toltec motifs endured, the feathered serpent still coiled across the stones. But everything felt condensed, miniaturized, squeezed within the tight space of a fortified city. It was the architecture of the post-classic, pragmatic, militarized, less about grandeur, more about control. Economically, Mayapan thrived on the networks already in place. Salt flowed from the northern coasts, honey and cotton from fertile lands, cacao from warmer regions, obsidian and jade through ancient trade routes. Even bronze bells and axe heads travelled in from far to the west. Its bustling markets were the city's heartbeat. Tribute and taxes streamed into the centre, ceremonies, festivals, and armed guards upheld the new order. Yet this was a double-edged sword. The more the elite demanded wealth to fund rituals and armies, the heavier the burden on the villages. Each drought, each failed harvest, widened the cracks beneath the surface. Politics in Mayapan was bound tight by family ties. Great lineages controlled offices, locked down privilege, sealed alliances with marriage. In late inscriptions and oral traditions, leaders appear who wielded both sacred rites and raw violence to maintain their power. They had learned well from the classic era. Whoever controlled the calendar and the rituals controlled the people. But that obsession with ceremony and honor often led to short-term choices. A system so closed, so rigid, could not absorb the shocks of famine, plague, or climate change. If Chichen Itza symbolized openness and cultural fusion, Mayapan embodied contraction and control. Its walls were both defense and declaration. From here on, the world was divided into boxes, each box needing a firm hand to rule it. Yet order lasts only as long as that hand is both strong and restrained. Once greed pushed past the limits of what communities could bear, fire rose from within. By the mid-15th century, the cord of alliance snapped. Rival lineages from the Puke Hills and the northwest rose against Mayapan's ruling clans. The revolt was not just a change of throne. It burned the very structure of centralized power to the ground. Yucatan fractured into many smaller political regions, the Cuchcabal, each led by local chiefs. The once mighty walled city became a hollow shell, blackened by civil war. Its toppled columns still seem to warn. No wall is tall enough to hold a society that has lost its consensus. From that moment, the political map of Yucatan splintered into a mosaic. Each Cuchcabal kept its own army, levied its own taxes, struck its own bargains. Markets still bustled, salt still moved along the coast, bees still made honey. Daily life went on. But above it, endless disputes and temporary truces defined the rhythm of politics. Without a central authority strong enough to mediate, communities held together only by short-term interests. The league that once promised unity faded into a fragile peace, purchased with constant, low-level conflict. Culture, however, did not vanish. Maya languages endured in the villages. The 260-day sacred calendar still guided births, marriages, and funerals. The old cosmology still framed life's turning points, yet the vision of a great capital had slipped into memory. No more towers rising above the forest canopy to converse with the sun. Only scaled-down echoes of El Castillo, the last effort of a weary dream. After Mayapan, leadership belonged to local chiefs, to near-term calculations, to low walls and short blades. If Mayapan teaches a lesson, it is the price of concentrated power after crisis. Centralization can bring stability, but without mechanisms for sharing and release, it becomes a pressure cooker. Mayapan clamped the lid tight, pressure built, and with no safety valve, the explosion was inevitable. Its fall was more than the collapse of a capital. It was the swing of the pendulum, driving Yucatan from unity back to fragmentation. A rhythm that would shape how the Maya faced what came next. For beyond the horizon, strange sails were approaching the shallow waters of the peninsula. As civil war still smoldered, voices and gunpowder from another continent were about to arrive. Fragmentation after Mayapan did not just weaken the Mayas' ability to heal themselves, it opened cracks for outsiders to enter. History does not always strike with a single blow. Sometimes it delivers an enemy precisely when you are weakest. And for the Maya, after centuries of cycles of rise, collapse, and rebirth, the next encounter would change their fate forever. The first encounter came in 1502, when Christopher Columbus, on his final voyage, crossed paths with a Maya trading canoe off the coast of Honduras. It was loaded with goods, cotton, salt, honey, brilliant feathers, and cacao. The Europeans were stunned by the wealth and organization of a people they had never even heard of. But that moment was only a fleeting glimpse. Within just a few decades, expeditions with far clearer intentions began pressing into the Yucatan coast. In 1511, a Spanish shipwreck washed the first survivors onto Maya shores. Among them was Gonzalo Guerrero, a soldier who was captured but eventually integrated into Maya society. He married a local woman, fathered mixed children, and rose to become a military leader, fighting side by side with the Maya against his own countrymen. His story became one of the most remarkable symbols of that era. To the Spanish, he was remembered as the father of the mestizo in Mexico. To the Maya, he was the foreign warrior who became an ally. But Guerrero's path was the exception, not the rule. Most Spaniards came with a dual mission: to expand the crown of Castile and to spread the Catholic faith. To their eyes, the temples, the stone idols, and the bloody sacrifices were idolatry that had to be erased. They carried the cross in one hand, and the sword and musket in the other. When Hernán Cortés marched into the heart of the Aztec world in 1519, the Maya were not his main target. Still, Yucatan quickly became strategic ground. On his way inland, Cortés dispatched forces to coastal towns. They met fierce resistance, but the imbalance was overwhelming. Gunpowder, horses, and disciplined tactics toppled one Cuchcabal after another. Yet the Maya were not the Aztec or the Inca. They had no single empire, no great capital to be toppled in one strike. Instead, they were scattered across dozens of independent polities, and that made conquest slower, messier. It would take nearly 2 centuries before the Spaniards subdued the Maya completely. Some towns signed treaties, others rose in revolt, and still others allied with the invaders to settle old rivalries. Their very divisions kept them from presenting a united front. At first, some Maya rulers treated submission as a political deal, pay tribute and retain a measure of local power. But as missionaries pushed deeper, smashing idols, burning manuscripts, and raising churches atop temple foundations, the struggle grew bitter. The Maya were not just losing political freedom, they were being struck at the very core of their spiritual world. One of the most devastating blows came in 1562 at the town of Mani. Bishop Diego de Landa ordered thousands of Maya codices and sacred images burned, convinced he was purging idolatry. In truth, he wiped away centuries of accumulated knowledge, astronomy, calendars, medicine, and myth. Only 4 Maya codices survive today, fragile fragments of a once great library. Meanwhile, invisible enemies swept through the land. Smallpox, measles, and influenza, diseases against which the Maya had no immunity, tore through entire communities. In just a few decades, vast numbers perished. It was not steel or gunpowder, but plague that proved the deadliest weapon. A single epidemic could erase a village in one season, leaving fields untended and homes abandoned. To the survivors, this destruction was more terrifying than conquest itself, as though the gods had turned away forever. And yet resistance never fully died. Through the 16th and 17th centuries, Maya groups rose in rebellion, retreating into the deep forests, striking Spanish garrisons, and keeping alive the hope of freedom. Some communities held on to their language and rituals, resisting assimilation in quiet defiance. Their world had changed forever, but they had not vanished. Throughout this era, waves of uprisings swept across the Yucatan. Each time taxes grew heavier, each time harvests failed, each time priests tried to erase another indigenous belief, Maya villages rose in rebellion. Most of these uprisings were crushed, but they proved one thing: the spirit of resistance never truly died. In remote forest communities, the Maya quietly kept their old rituals alive alongside the Catholic Church, weaving a kind of double fabric of culture, outwardly marked by the cross, but inwardly still devoted to the rain god Chak, the maize god, and the feathered serpent Kukulkan. That blending was also clear in language. The Maya learned Spanish to deal with authorities, but within homes and villages, their native tongue endured. Catechisms were translated into Maya, but at the same time, ancient stories were written down in Latin script, saving pieces of memory after the codices were burned. It was in this context that the Popol Vuh, the sacred epic of the Quiché Maya in Guatemala, was transcribed in the 17th century. Without the persistence of half-converted native scribes, humanity might have lost this masterpiece of Maya imagination forever. Resistance wasn't just on the battlefield, it also lived in the quiet persistence of daily life. Maya farmers kept planting maize, beans, squash and chili peppers using the traditional milpa system. They continued to read the signs of the sky and the forest to track the seasons. They still held ceremonies to call for rain, sometimes hidden beneath the cover of a Catholic Mass. This was how they defended the seed of their identity, not only with swords and spears, but with endurance and continuity. By the 18th century, as the Spanish Empire began to weaken, new opportunities for rebellion emerged. In some regions, Maya fighters rose up, killing colonial officials, destroying churches, and reviving old rituals. In other places, they joined forces with other insurgent groups, creating larger movements. But disunity and the imbalance of weapons meant they rarely held on to gains for long. Often, after just a few months, royal troops returned to crush the uprisings. Blood stained the fields once again, and the survivors slipped back into the forests. Still, the essential truth remained: The Maya never disappeared. They were not relics of a lost civilization, but living communities, still struggling, still breathing within the current of history. Each failed revolt, each burned village, carved a deeper memory of pain into the collective mind. And those memories were never buried. They were passed down, generation after generation, like an underground current, waiting for the day it would burst to the surface. If the 16th century was the first storm, then the 17th and 18th centuries were the endless rains, eroding, wearing down, but never erasing. The Maya learned to live with their conquerors, at once obeying and resisting, blending and preserving. It was a tense, uneasy balance, but it allowed them to survive through the hardest centuries. And as history edged toward the 19th century, a new storm loomed. This time it would not come from Spain, but from the newly independent nations rising on the ruins of empire. For the Maya, a change of rulers would not mean freedom. New oppressions, new wars, and perhaps new chances, all waited just beyond the horizon. The 19th century opened with political earthquakes shaking all of Latin America. The mighty Spanish Empire, once stretching from California down to Patagonia, cracked and fell apart. Independence movements rose everywhere, carrying banners of liberty and equality. In 1821, Mexico formally declared its independence, and the Yucatan Peninsula, the ancestral homeland of the Maya, became part of this new nation. But for the Maya, this shift was no dawn of freedom. It was simply the same oppression, wearing new clothes. Large haciendas, sprawling estates owned by Spanish-descended elites or mixed-race landowners, kept expanding, swallowing up traditional farming lands. The Maya were forced into labor, burdened with crushing taxes, and often trapped in perpetual cycles of debt. Forests and fields that had once belonged to communities were transformed into vast plantations of henequen, the agave fiber that fueled the world's demand for rope. Every acre of soil became a commodity, and the people who once saw the earth as their mother were reduced to laborers on their own ancestral ground. Tensions grew for decades until they finally erupted in flame. The caste war of Yucatan, beginning in 1847. This was not just another revolt, it was an all-out war between the Maya and the landowning class, backed by the Mexican state. Families stripped of land, farmers beaten and exploited past endurance, saw no path left but to take up arms. At first, the Maya won astonishing victories. Indigenous fighters, hardened by life in the jungle and driven by fierce determination, defeated Mexican troops again and again, pushing dangerously close to major cities like Mérida. For a moment it seemed the entire Yucatan Peninsula might fall into their hands. In Maya memory, those years felt like an echo of a distant empire reborn, as though once again they had risen to claim their destiny. One of the most extraordinary elements of this struggle was the rise of the so-called talking cross. According to tradition, in the forest region of Chan Santa Cruz, a wooden cross was said to speak, guiding and inspiring the Maya in their resistance. Though layered with Catholic symbolism, it blended with indigenous faith to form a new spiritual center. Chan Santa Cruz became the rebel capital where the Maya established their own government, maintaining de facto independence for decades. But over time, the balance shifted. Divisions grew within the Maya movement. Some groups sought compromise while others vowed to fight to the bitter end. Meanwhile, Mexico's army, armed with foreign weapons and outside resources, regained strength. The war dragged on for over 50 years, relentless, bloody, and devastating, turning the Yucatan into a battlefield of attrition. By the early 20th century, the resistance had weakened, though a handful of Maya communities deep in the forests continued to live autonomously well into the 1930s. The caste war left deep scars. Tens of thousands of Maya died from fighting, hunger, or disease. Villages were wiped off the map, and survivors fled into the jungle. Yet it also etched an undeniable truth into history. The Maya were not a vanished people, lost to the shadows of the 9th century, but a living community, still standing, still fighting for their right to exist on their own land, no matter how many times their oppressors changed names and faces. The irony is striking. To many Mexicans of that era, the Maya were seen as backward, an obstacle to progress. But in truth, their resilience was proof that no people can be buried entirely under the weight of history. The Maya resisted not only with weapons, but with memory, with language, and with an unbreakable cultural will. As the long war faded and the 20th century dawned, the Maya entered a new chapter. The winds of industry, of modern nation-states, and of globalization swept slowly down into the Yucatan Peninsula and the Guatemalan highlands. Yet for most Maya communities, daily life still revolved around cornfields, terraced farms, and villages tucked away beneath the forest canopy. They did not step into the new century as a blank slate, but carrying the weight of centuries, memories of resistance, of failed uprisings, and of a cultural identity threatened time and again with erasure. In Mexico, after the revolution of 1910 to 1920, the new state sought to build a single, unified national identity. But this identity, wrapped in the idea of mestizaje, the blending of Spanish and indigenous roots, often pushed the Maya to the margins. They were celebrated as great ancestors, as distant figures decorating the nation's myth, yet in real life, their descendants were dismissed as poor, backward, and unworthy of a voice in politics. Maya languages were ridiculed in schools, traditional rituals were banned or restricted, and their lands continued to shrink under the weight of modern economic projects. In Guatemala, the story was even harsher. The 20th century there unfolded under a chain of political instability, from military dictatorships to decades of civil war. The Maya, nearly half the population yet trapped at the bottom of the social order, became the target of systemic violence. The Guatemalan Civil War, 1960 to 1996, was a wound of particular depth. Hundreds of thousands of Maya were killed in the army's counter-insurgency campaigns, and entire villages were wiped off the map. Behind the statistics lay a nightmare. People condemned not for what they did, but simply for being indigenous, branded as potential enemies by their own government. And yet, even in that darkness, Maya identity endured. In remote villages, women continued to weave cloth with traditional patterns. Designs that were not just beautiful, but encoded with messages and symbols of an ancient world-view. The brightly embroidered huipil blouses they wore declared, wordlessly, "We are still here." Maya languages, though pushed out of schools, survived in lullabies, in marketplaces, and in stories whispered from grandparents to grandchildren. At the start of the 20th century, Western archaeologists began pouring into Yucatan and Guatemala, astonished by the pyramids hidden in the forest. Ruins like Tikal, Copan, Palenque, and Chichen Itza became celebrated global icons. And yet here lay a bitter irony. The world praised the Maya as a lost civilization. While living Maya, people remained impoverished and dismissed. Tourists marveled at the towering stone temples, but rarely noticed the Maya vendors selling trinkets just outside the gates. Still, by the mid-20th century, change was stirring. Linguists, anthropologists, and historians began working with indigenous communities to recover stolen memory. Though only 4 original codices survived, patient scholarship, together with the living memory of the Maya themselves, slowly brought their writing system and calendar back into clarity. The popular tale of a civilization that vanished gave way to a deeper truth. The Maya never disappeared. They transformed, adapted, and continued on. By the end of the 20th century, the Maya appeared to the world in two strikingly different images. On one hand, they became the centerpiece of global imagination, massive stone pyramids, UNESCO World Heritage Sites, ancient gods covered in moss. Tourists from across the world poured into Chichen Itza, Tikal, Palenque, Copan, snapping photos, marveling at the glory of the past. But just outside those gates, present-day Maya communities lived in poverty, pushed to the margins of modern economies, remembered mostly as souvenir sellers in their own ancestral lands. Globalization brought opportunity, but also widened inequality. Governments in Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize turned Maya ruins into tourist gold mines, collecting millions of dollars. But little of that wealth reached indigenous communities. Instead, Maya families were often forced off their traditional lands to make way for resorts, or reduced to the lowest rungs of the tourism economy. A bitter paradox repeated itself. Their civilization was celebrated by the world, while their descendants still struggled for recognition and dignity. Yet out of that injustice came a wave of cultural awakening. Maya activists, intellectuals, and artists began raising their voices. They rewrote history in their own words, not just the history of pyramids and wars, but of communities, farmers, and women. Bilingual schools emerged, teaching children both Spanish and Maya languages, ensuring their ancestral tongue would not be buried. Traditional festivals, once condemned as pagan, were revived and held openly, at once sacred rituals and political declarations. We are still here. In the 1990s, the world's attention suddenly turned back to the Maya calendar, but in a distorted way. The so-called 2012 prophecy, widely misinterpreted as predicting the end of the world, made headlines across the globe. While most of the hype was misinformation, it did spark renewed interest in Maya astronomy and their complex calendar system. Scholars, and Maya voices themselves, stepped in to clarify 2012 was not the end, but the beginning of a new cycle. In correcting that myth, they were not only defending academic truth, but reclaiming the right to interpret their own heritage. Globalization also pulled the Maya into another battlefront, the environment. The tropical forests they had lived in for millennia were being logged, cleared for industrial farming, or threatened by climate change. Indigenous communities found themselves on the front lines of environmental defense. Maya leaders rose against mining projects, hydroelectric dams, and palm oil plantations, insisting that land was not just a resource, but a mother, a living identity. Their struggle connected them with indigenous movements worldwide, from the Amazon to North America, turning the Maya into a powerful voice reminding humanity of its bond with nature. Meanwhile, Maya culture began to shine in contemporary art and politics. Maya writers published novels and poetry in their native languages, carrying both the pain of history and the hope of renewal. Maya politicians entered parliaments, still few but visible, showing that Maya were not just a glorious past, but citizens of the present with a right to representation. Documentaries, international festivals, and even the Internet became tools for Maya voices to echo far beyond the forest, reaching a global audience. Yet commercialization always lurked nearby. Companies used Maya gods as marketing icons, turning them into trendy labels. Tourist agencies packaged sacred rituals into stage shows for visitors, stripping away their spiritual core. A new paradox emerged. Heritage was revived, yet sometimes distorted to suit the market. The Maya had to fight continuously to reclaim control over their culture, to prevent it from being reduced to a prop in someone else's story. By the close of the 20th century and into the 21st, The Maya's presence was something rare, commodified yet celebrated, marginalized yet resilient, oppressed yet rising to assert themselves. No longer just shadows of the past, they were living communities, complex, dynamic, wounded yet determined to renew themselves. As the 21st century began, a quiet yet powerful revival spread through Maya communities. After centuries of marginalization, contempt, and exclusion, more and more Maya chose to rise and tell their own history, in their own languages, through art, literature, and religion. No longer just objects of study for archaeologists or attractions for tourists, they were becoming subjects once again, reclaiming the right to interpret their identity and heritage. One of the clearest signs of this revival has been language. Across Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, and Honduras, Maya peoples are working to bring their mother tongues back into the classroom. Bilingual education programs have taken root, where children learn both Spanish or English alongside Quiche, Yucatec, Quechua, or Mam. In many villages, teachers come from the community itself, teaching not just words and grammar, but also a way of seeing the world shaped by Maya tradition. For language is not only a tool of communication, it is a lens through which to understand the universe. When a child learns to call the sun by its Maya name, they are also learning to see the sun as a living being, a father who nourishes life. Alongside this, modern Maya literature has begun to flourish. Poets like Humberto Acabal, a Quiche writer, compose in both their native language and Spanish, letting their voices echo both within the community and across the global stage. His poems carry the breath of mountains and forests, weaving simple yet profound metaphors. A bird's song, a raindrop, a kernel of maize. It is the continuation of an ancient oral tradition, and at the same time a declaration. The Maya do not belong only to the past, they are creating in the present. Younger writers and scholars continue this path, turning literature into a tool for affirming the survival of their language and culture. In the visual arts, the message is equally clear. Patterns embroidered on huipilis, murals painted in villages, and even contemporary works in city galleries all carry the same refrain. The colors of the Maya have never faded. Spirals evoking the cosmos, bright hues mirroring cycles of harvest, now step beyond their traditional frames to converse with the language of global art. Maya painters exhibit not only at home, but in Europe and North America, bringing ancient symbols into dialogue with the pulse of contemporary creativity. Religion and spirituality, too, have undergone a striking revival. After centuries of being overshadowed by Catholicism, ancient rituals are once again practiced openly. On the mountain peaks of the Guatemalan highlands, altars are raised, where Quiche, spiritual guides, perform ceremonies with fire, maize flour, and incense. They pray in their native tongues, calling for harmony between humans, nature, and the divine. Often these rituals coexist alongside Catholic churches, creating a dual religious landscape where past and present intertwine. For many Maya, this is not contradiction but balance, a way of reconciling two worlds. Perhaps the most powerful element of this revival is the redefinition of history itself. Instead of accepting the narrative that the Maya disappeared, intellectuals and activists insist we never disappeared, we were forced to change. Conferences, research, and documentaries produced with Maya voices offer a new perspective, one from within. They affirm that the existence of millions of Maya today is living proof, dismantling the myth of a dead civilization. The 21st century has not only opened the door to cultural revival for the Maya, but also placed them at the center of larger social and political struggles. After centuries of being pushed to the margins, the Maya are now stepping onto the global stage, carrying the voice of a people deeply tied to the land, scarred by painful memories, yet driven by a powerful longing for justice. In Guatemala, where the Maya make up nearly half the population, indigenous movements have become a major social force. After the 1996 peace accords ended decades of civil war, many Maya organizations began fighting for political rights. No longer willing to accept the role of a minority left on the sidelines, they asserted themselves as a central part of the nation. Indigenous leaders entered parliament, Maya student movements appeared on university campuses, and grassroots networks spread across the highlands. For the first time in centuries, the Maya voice began to resonate not only in villages but also in Congress halls and on national media. Yet the path forward has been anything but easy. Corruption, racism, and political violence remain constant obstacles. Many indigenous leaders, especially environmental defenders, have been threatened, imprisoned, or assassinated. Mining, hydroelectric, and industrial agriculture projects often target Maya territories, sparking long-running conflicts. When a river is dammed for hydropower, it is not just the environment that suffers. An entire spiritual world tied to that river is torn apart. For this reason, protests are not only about economic survival, but also about defending identity and the balance between humans and nature. In Mexico, the strongest image of indigenous resistance is the Zapatista movement. In 1994, the very day NAFTA came into effect, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, EZLN, made up largely of indigenous farmers in Chiapas, many of them Maya, rose up in rebellion. They seized towns and declared their opposition to the injustice global trade policies imposed on indigenous farmers. While the Zapatistas did not represent only Maya people, most of their fighters and leaders came from Maya communities. Since then, Chiapas has become a symbol of indigenous resistance against global powers. Their slogan, "Ya basta," enough is enough, echoed not just through Mexico, but across the world. What made the Zapatistas unique is that they did not remain an armed movement. Instead, they transformed into a social and political experiment rooted in direct democracy, gender equality, and respect for nature. For decades now, autonomous Zapatista communities have run their own schools, clinics, and local councils. In a world where trust in political institutions is collapsing, the Zapatistas offer something different, a way of living that the Maya have once again shown humanity. A society built on sharing, not imposed power. The Maya resurgence is also deeply tied to human rights. After centuries of being silenced, they now fight to be recognized as full citizens. With the right to speak their own languages, to learn through their own cultural traditions, and to participate equally in society. International agreements like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007 have become tools in this struggle. While enforcement is still weak, the existence of a global legal framework gives strength and legitimacy to their demands, reminding governments that their struggle is not isolated. The Maya's role in the 21st century connects them directly to global issues. They are on the front lines of the fight against climate change, as their rainforests and farmlands are threatened by deforestation and industrial agriculture. They live the reality of fragile ecosystems, as growing droughts and irregular seasons echo ancient memories of collapse. Once again, the Maya remind the world of a truth they have carried for centuries. Humanity cannot survive apart from nature. All of this shows that the Maya are not simply a story in textbooks, nor just ruins for tourists. They are a living people, resisting, creating, and reshaping the future. They carry a lesson modern humanity urgently needs. The resilience of a people is not measured by the size of their stone pyramids, but by their ability to rise after centuries of oppression and continue demanding the right to live as themselves. And so, in a twist of history, those once dismissed as ancient now speak with some of the loudest voices about the future, about social justice, about the survival of the planet. In their voice, past and present converge to ask a single question. Perhaps the Maya never vanished at all. Perhaps they are becoming one of the clearest mirrors for our world today. While Maya communities in Central America continue planting corn, weaving cloth, keeping their languages alive, and practicing rituals, the image of the Maya in the outside world has taken on a very different life. It has become a global symbol, reshaped in books, films, tourism, and even pop culture. Yet between that image and the lived reality of Maya, people lies a wide gap, one that fuels the world's imagination while also layering on new misunderstandings. From the early 20th century, archaeology began elevating the Maya to a place of honor in major museums. Statues, carved reliefs, ceramics, and inscriptions were carried out of the rainforest and displayed in New York, Paris, and London. To the Western public, the Maya became a lost civilization, mysterious and exotic, placed on the same stage as Egypt and Mesopotamia. That image thrilled imaginations, turning the Maya from a distant people into a global fascination. But along with it came a fixed narrative, glorious in the past, vanished in an unexplained collapse. Few stopped to notice that millions of Maya were, and still are, alive, their history continuing in the present. Hollywood also reinforced and distorted this picture. Mel Gibson's 2006 film Apocalypto is perhaps the most famous example. It depicted a world of savage violence, bloody sacrifices, and chaos. Despite its elaborate production, the movie left audiences with the impression that the Maya were brutal, self-destructive people. Maya scholars and communities strongly objected, arguing that the film was not only historically wrong, but dangerous, reducing a civilization of immense knowledge to a symbol of barbarity. Yet for many viewers worldwide, those bloody images stuck, reinforcing a false myth. Tourism has created similar contradictions. Maya ruins are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, attracting millions of visitors every year. Chichen Itza was even named one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Stone pyramids have become postcards, T-shirts, posters, even brand logos. Tourism generates enormous revenue for governments and corporations, but local Maya communities often see very little of it. In many cases, sacred rituals have been turned into staged shows for tourists, stripped of their spiritual meaning, repackaged as entertainment. The academic world has, in its own way, contributed to the shaping of this image. For decades, research focused almost exclusively on the ancient past. Architecture, astronomy, writing. Those studies unlocked deep knowledge, but they also reinforced the idea that the Maya existed only in history. Only recently, with indigenous anthropologists and historians stepping forward, has the story begun to balance. Today, Maya scholars participate in international conferences, reminding the world that they are not just subjects of study, but co-authors of their own history. In popular culture, Maya imagery shows up in surprising places: video games, comic books, science fiction novels. Gods, hieroglyphs, and pyramids are often cast as clues to hidden treasure or gateways to secret worlds. Players and readers are captivated by the mystique, but rarely see the deeper reality of the culture. The Maya are turned into a decorative shell, an appealing brand, while the living people behind it remain invisible. All of this raises a sharp question. Who are the Maya in the global imagination? Are they a vanished civilization, a mysterious symbol, a tourist attraction, or a living people? The distance between image and reality is itself part of the disappearance we so often speak of. It is not that the Maya vanished, but that the world turned them into shadows of the past, while flesh and blood people continued to exist. And yet, within that distance lies opportunity. When the world pays attention to the Maya, whether through tourism, movies, or the 2012 prophecy hype, it also creates a space for Maya communities to speak back, to reclaim interpretation, to say, we are not only the past, we are the present. In that dialogue, the image of the Maya can slowly shift, restored with humanity, brought closer to the truth. For much of the modern world, the Maya are still seen through the lens of tourism, film, and popular culture, a distorted image that turns them into something distant and exotic. But when we place the Maya into the broader story of humanity, another question rises more clearly. Why is it that in lands separated by tens of thousands of miles among peoples who never knew each other, the same sacred form of architecture appears again and again? The pyramid, the Maya of Central America, and the Egyptians of North Africa left no evidence of transoceanic trade or migration. And yet in the deep jungle, stone stairways rose skyward, while in the desert, massive triangular blocks stood as if defying the passage of time itself. Two entirely opposite environments, two cultures with no contact, both chose to build an eternal symbol that transcended geography. In Egypt, pyramids were created as everlasting tombs for pharaohs, kings regarded as divine beings. Their massive, sealed stone structures reflected a belief in immortality and the permanence of royal power. The positioning of the pyramids at Giza was even aligned with the constellation Orion, as though the entire cosmos had been summoned to bear witness to the immortality of kingship. For the Maya, however, the pyramid was not a tomb, but a sacred staircase, a bridge between earth and sky. At the top stood temples where priests carried out rituals and observed the heavens. Time, for the Maya, was not a straight line, but an endless circle, where every cycle of the sun, the moon, and Venus carried sacred meaning. The pyramid of El Castillo at Chichen Itza makes this belief visible. On the spring equinox, the sunlight casts the shadow of the serpent god Kukulkan slithering down its steps. It was both a feat of engineering and a harmonious blending of astronomy, spirituality, and architecture, a reflection of humanity's desire to be one with the universe. The contrast of environments only sharpened the philosophies of each civilization. Egypt, arid and confined, built enclosed monuments that mirrored faith in immortality and eternal order. The Maya, surrounded by a jungle both abundant and fragile, raised open stairways reaching for the sky, expressing faith in cycles, renewal, and the rhythm of the cosmos. One sealed power into stone, the other opened a door for light and the divine. Their approaches were different, but their yearning was the same, to rise beyond human fate and touch the infinite. It is precisely these echoes of both similarity and difference that continue to stir scholars today. Was this simply parallel evolution, where people across the world arrived at the same solution to a shared longing for transcendence? Or was there something deeper, a hidden connection still waiting to be uncovered? If Egypt and the Maya were two opposing poles of the same pyramid idea, one a sealed tomb rising from the desert, the other an open stairway in the jungle pointing toward the sky, then in another land, often called the cradle of civilization, we encounter yet another unique variation of that very motif. This was Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where as early as 4000 BCE, people built towering structures known as ziggurats. These massive step towers, though lacking the triangular symmetry of Giza or the steep stone stairways of Chichen Itza, carried the same essential idea, a man-made mountain that connected the human world with the sacred realm of the gods. Among them, the most famous is the ziggurat of Ur, built around the 21st century BCE under King Ur-Nammu. It rose in 3 great tiers, each one a massive platform made from sun-dried bricks fired into hardness. At its summit stood a temple believed to be the dwelling place of Nana, the moon god. To the people of Mesopotamia, the ziggurat was not a place for the public to gather, nor a site for observing the skies, but the very home of the deity. It was sacred ground, set apart, accessible only to priests and the king. For the rest of the community, the ziggurat was something to behold from a distance, a stairway to heaven, a symbol of the invisible link between mortals and the divine. When we compare this with the Maya, a shared symbolism emerges, though their approaches diverged. Both cultures envisioned the need for an artificial mountain, a vertical axis connecting earth to sky, a sacred channel between humans and the divine. But while the Maya placed temples at the top of their pyramids for priests to perform rituals and observe the cosmos, the Mesopotamians saw the ziggurat itself as the god's dwelling, a holy space reserved for divine presence and priestly mediation. The Maya wove architecture into the rhythm of astronomy. Mesopotamia tied it to the absolute authority of the gods. The differences also reflect geography and materials. In Mesopotamia, large stone was scarce. People relied on what they had, river mud. They dried it, fired it, and stacked it into bricks to raise their ziggurats. As a result, most of these towers survive today only as eroded cores or foundations worn down by thousands of years. By contrast, the stone pyramids of Egypt and the Maya proved far more durable, anchoring their civilizations in global memory. This reminds us that humanity's legacy is shaped not only by imagination, but also by the materials and environments from which it is built. And yet, despite all differences, the core impulse remains clear. Both Mesopotamia and the Maya sought to raise a sacred mountain within the heart of their communities. Perhaps deep down, ancient peoples everywhere shared the same longing, to rise beyond the ordinary earth, to build a bridge, a stairway, a pathway that might bring them closer to the realm of the divine. And from that same longing, we encounter other versions of this shared idea in faraway lands. If in Mesopotamia the ziggurats were the stairways of the gods, then in the east, across the lush jungles and fertile plains of Southeast Asia, we find yet another expression, the temple mountains of Angkor Wat and Borobudur, where the man-made mountain was not only architecture, but an entire worldview carved into stone. Angkor Wat, built in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II of the Khmer Empire, is far more than a temple. It is a miniature model of the Hindu universe. At its center rises a cluster of spires symbolizing Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain where the gods dwell. Surrounding it are vast moats representing the cosmic ocean, while its galleries, courtyards, and subsidiary towers evoke the heavens and continents that circle the divine center. Walking through Angkor Wat is like moving through a stone version of the cosmos, step by step approaching the sacred heart of existence. Borobudur, on the island of Java in Indonesia, built in the 9th century under the Sailendra dynasty, reflects a Buddhist vision. This massive step monument rises in 9 stacked levels. The lowest square tiers represent the world of desire and suffering. As pilgrims ascend, the platforms transition into circles, symbolizing the realms of detachment and spiritual awakening. At the summit stands a great stupa representing nirvana, the ultimate state of enlightenment. Each step up Borobudur is not just a climb-up stone, but a journey of the soul, moving from the earthly toward the serene and transcendent. When we place Angkor Wat and Borobudur alongside the pyramids of the Maya, a striking resonance emerges. All 3 were built as tiered, layered mountains, artificial peaks rising from the earth. All three embody a journey from ground to sky, from the human to the sacred, and yet the differences are just as revealing. The Maya focused on astronomy, turning their pyramids into observatories where sunlight, shadow, and starlight became part of ritual. Angkor was rooted in Hindu cosmology, recreating the divine order of the universe. Borobudur carried pilgrims on a Buddhist path of liberation and enlightenment. These contrasts remind us of something profound. Every civilization may carve out its own path, yet their destination is remarkably similar: to raise a sacred space where human beings can reach toward the higher planes of existence. When we step out of the jungles of Central America and move beyond the Temple Mountains of Southeast Asia, another surprise awaits. In lands half a world apart, similar forms of architecture quietly emerge. It seems that deep within the human mind, no matter where, no matter the circumstances, the image of a man-made mountain, a pyramid, or a stepped tower always finds its place. And that is when we turn to the Andes of South America and to the burning deserts of Africa. In Peru, recent archaeological discoveries have revealed Caral, an ancient city often considered one of the oldest civilizations in the Americas, dating back to around 3000 BCE. What strikes us most is that Caral, too, had massive stepped pyramids built of earth and stone, with a circular plaza at the center. Caral was not a city of war or violence. There is no evidence of weapons or defensive walls. Instead, it seems to have thrived as a ceremonial and trading hub, where music, rituals, and commerce bound the community together. Yet even in such a peaceful society, the idea of raising great stairways skyward appeared, as if it were an instinctive need to connect human life with the cosmos. Further south, in the heart of the Andes, the architectural wonders of the Inca leave us in awe. Machu Picchu, though not a pyramid in the classic sense, unfolds in layered terraces that blend into the mountainside, with axes aligned to celestial events. Like the Maya, the Inca designed their sacred spaces around the movements of the sun and moon. At the Temple of the Sun in Cusco, the rays of sunrise and sunset pass through stone windows to strike precisely calculated points. Once again, architecture and astronomy merged, creating a universal language that transcended geography. In Africa, beyond Egypt, whose pyramids are world famous, lies a lesser-known land, Nubia, in present-day Sudan. Here, steep and slender pyramids still rise from the desert. They are not as massive as those at Giza, but they are far more numerous. Hundreds stand at Meroe and Napata. The Nubian pharaohs, who once ruled even over Egypt for a time, left behind these monuments as marks of power and faith. Their sharply angled form, distinct from Egypt's broad-based pyramids, recalls the steep steps of Central America. And this leaves us with a lingering question: was this mere coincidence, or is there a deeper logic, a shared impulse of thought, that guided human beings everywhere to build toward the sky? After journeying through monuments scattered across the world, from the stepped pyramids of Caral to the steep tombs of Nubia, from the valleys of the Andes to the jungles of Central America, the question only grows larger. Why is it that everywhere people chose the same form of symbol, a man-made mountain, a pyramid, a stairway to the sky? Was this just coincidence, a parallel evolution of human ideas? Or behind all these strange repetitions, could there be something deeper, a shared human civilization now lost, leaving only fragments in our memory and in stone? The theory of a lost global civilization is hardly new. Since the time of Plato, humanity has heard the story of Atlantis, a great island swallowed by the sea in a single day and night. Later centuries gave birth to other legends: Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, Mu in the Pacific. These stories have never been proven, yet they continue to captivate, because they offer a tempting explanation for the baffling repetition of symbols and architecture. If such a civilization once existed, advanced enough to scatter knowledge across continents, then the pyramids of the Maya, Egypt, or Mesopotamia's ziggurats might simply be remnants, broken shards of a vast picture. Mainstream archaeology remains cautious, as no hard scientific evidence has confirmed civilizations like Atlantis. But that has not stopped independent scholars and thinkers from asking. Some point to the astronomical precision of the Maya, or the way the Egyptians aligned Giza's pyramids with the stars, feats they argue were too advanced for their time. The Inca carved and fitted stones weighing dozens of tons so tightly that not even a blade of grass could slide between them. To modern eyes, these technical secrets look astonishingly sophisticated, and so the hypothesis of a primordial global civilization resurfaces again and again. Two main explanations are often offered. The first, humanity may have developed complex knowledge far earlier than we think, but war, disaster, or climate shifts erased most of it. Later, civilizations kept only fragments, half memories that reappeared as pyramids, observatories, or myth. The second, bolder theory, perhaps there really was a highly advanced society with networks stretching across continents, which then vanished completely, leaving only scattered traces to confuse the future. If this were true, the Maya would not be just a regional culture, but a surviving link in a broken global chain. Yet the real appeal of this theory lies not only in technical puzzles, but in meaning. The pyramid, in the end, is a universal language. The language of aspiration, of reaching upward, of bridging heaven and earth. Maybe what we call a shared civilization did not need a single government or empire. Perhaps it was a collective memory of humankind itself. A memory that arose wherever people confronted life, death, and the mystery of the cosmos, carving the same symbols into stone. In this light, the Maya are both familiar and unique. Familiar because their pyramids continued a global tradition. Unique because they turned those stone steps into living observatories, tools to track time, predict harvests, and create a calendar so advanced it still astonishes the modern world. They transformed a universal symbol into something practical, a stone computer pulsing with the rhythm of the cosmos. That creativity sets them apart in the story of lost civilizations. They did not merely repeat the form, they reshaped it, leaving their own distinct mark. Perhaps we will never have a definitive answer to the question, did a lost global civilization ever exist? But the uncanny repetition of pyramids, from Egypt to the Maya, from Mesopotamia to the Andes, from Nubia to Southeast Asia, will always remain a reminder. Humanity has never stopped searching for its connection to the universe. And in that journey, the Maya stand as witness, as proof, and as mystery, inseparable from the collective memory of us all. When we step away from grand theories and return to the everyday, a simple truth emerges, one that centuries of misunderstanding have obscured. The Maya never disappeared. To the outside world, they are often framed as a civilization that collapsed. Yet in the villages of the Yucatan Peninsula, people still plant corn, still weave cloth, still speak the languages of their ancestors. Here lies a profound paradox. The Maya exist both as a global memory and as a living people, standing between loss and continuity. The ruined pyramids hidden in the jungle, the hieroglyphs carved deep into stone stelae, the remnants of a sophisticated astronomy, all of these have become part of humanity's collective memory. They remind us that everywhere people once looked to the sky, once built stairways to connect the earth with the sacred. The Maya are not just a single chapter in the history of the Americas, but part of a much larger story, the timeless human longing to find meaning in an infinite universe. What makes the Maya unique is the way they turned symbols into practice. For Egypt, pyramids were tombs. For Mesopotamia, ziggurats were thrones of the gods. For Angkor, stone temples became the axis of the cosmos. But for the Maya, pyramids were clocks, calendars, stone-built computers. They transformed the sacred connection with the heavens into a tool for measuring time, for tracking seasons, for sustaining life itself. In their world, the cosmos was not distant. It was woven into every day, every harvest, every drumbeat in a festival. We often view the Maya through the lens of loss, but perhaps the truer way is through the lens of memory. Memory never dies. It may be covered, misunderstood, reshaped, but it endures, waiting to be awakened. And when we see the Maya as part of humanity's shared memory, we realize they never truly vanished. They adapted, they changed form, but they left traces that call us to reflect. In the end, the Maya story is also a mirror of ourselves today. We too are building our own pyramids, cities of steel and glass, networks of artificial knowledge, dreams of reaching the stars. And like the Maya, we carry questions with no final answer. Will what we build endure, or will it someday sink into silence, leaving behind mysterious ruins for the future to puzzle over? In the quiet of the jungle, as the sun sinks behind the pyramid of Chichen Itza, one can feel that the Maya do not belong only to the past. They whisper still, in the wind brushing the stone steps, in the sunlight sliding across ancient walls, in the voices of their descendants who live today. They remind us that disappearance can be an illusion. What remains, what never dies, is memory. The memory of a people, and the memory of humanity itself. And within that memory the Maya endure, as mirror, as question, and as a half-answered riddle, urging us to keep reflecting on life, on death, and on the fragile marks humans leave upon the vastness of the cosmos.